All right, let's look at something that has concerned wildlife lovers, many South Africans. The global rhino poaching crisis should not be left as a silent crisis. Last week, the South African government confirmed that the country's poaching incidents are still at crisis levels. The report did reveal that just over 1,000 rhinos were illegally killed last year. That's 26 fewer than in 2016. So we're not seeing major progress, although there is some progress. Corruption and mismanagement within governments and cross-border trade still great concern. Let's look at this in greater detail. And joining us in studio is a wildlife filmmaker and presenter, Bonne de Bod. And Bonne, thank you for being here. You are following this, putting together a whole lot of footage, following what's happening when the poachers are caught even. So that's for Strip. Just tell me about what you've been doing.
Well, thank you for having me, Francis. So yes, Strip is an independent documentary feature film, basically looking at the world of rhino poaching and everything in between. So from the battlegrounds in the Kruger National Park, the hardest hit area, KwaZulu-Natal, Umfolozi, Umfolozi, where we've been given exclusive access to the rangers. So that's been phenomenal. Then we also look at private rhino owners, the very controversial topic of trade in rhino horn. We follow little rhino orphans who have lost their mothers to poaching, and the rehabilitators doing everything in their power to get these little guys back into the wild.
What happens to them?
Well, if they're very young still, they get rescued and then they're brought to these rehabilitation centers. Yeah. And the end goal is always to rewild them. It's not as easy as it sounds.
Are they accepted easily by their community?
The little orphans is accepted, yes. The other orphans,
when they're reintroduced,
they're very sociable animals.
Yeah.
So, and when they are reintroduced, there's always, most of the time, there's success with that. But it's not as easy as it sounds. You know, a lot of hard work goes into it. And then we also follow state prosecutors who are handling the rhino poaching cases. And we take the viewers to the underground backrooms of Vietnamese and Chinese smugglers in Southeast Asia, and also end up interviewing the end user of rhino horn. So, and we're doing this film so that no one can say, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I think we might look back 10 years from now, and this could have been the turning point. And either we would have saved the species from extinction, or we would have failed miserably. And our children's children can only see rhinos, appreciate the beauty of this iconic animal in a zoo, or 10 Rand note or coloring book.
So the stats came out, hardly moving, a difference of 26 when you're talking about around about 1,000. Does that surprise you, given what you've seen on the ground?
You know, we always hear about the rhino poaching numbers, we watch it on TV, we read about it, but the question is, what do those figures mean? It's a slight decrease. As the Minister announced, 1,028 rhinos poached nationally in 2017. So that's down from 1,054, which was poached in 2016. So a slight decrease, 26 fewer animals poached. So for the second year in a row, we've seen a slight decrease. And that's thanks to the effort in the Kruger National Park. Great news for Kruger. This very well-known hotspot is down by 24%. So just over 500 rhinos poached there, and that's great. But we have to look at or take a closer look at the provincial stats, because that tells us, and that shows us the true story behind the numbers. All the other provinces, if we look at, except for the Kruger region, only 3 other provinces actually achieved negative poaching numbers. And that is Gauteng, which we don't really count because we don't have many rhinos in Gauteng, the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. All the other provinces have been hard hit. KwaZulu-Natal, France, is an absolute disaster, up from 162 to 222. Sure. That's an increase of nearly 40%. And then the Free State, the worst of all, up by 124%.
So what is the Kruger Park doing that others can learn from? Because it sounds like at least there's signs of success.
There's some progress there. I think there has been a lot of money put into the anti-poaching efforts in the park.
So more people on the ground, basically,
more
looking for the poachers.
More people on the ground, more anti-poaching technology. And there are fewer rhinos left to poach in the park. We all know this. But I think what's important is the enforcement teams inside the park are starting to really work well together. And it's all about team effort. I filmed with the Sandparks Rangers on the ground, the SABC investigators, the special prosecutors from the MPA, and they have worked exceptionally hard to catch and prosecute and convict the many poaching gangs coming into the park to poach our rhinos.
From what you've seen, so how do you address this? Is it about just having enough boots on the ground to find them? I mean, there's been experimentation, poisoning of the rhino horns to deter those end users who want to use it for medicinal purposes, like you said. What do you see? Were you surprised by any of the new methods or where it's all going?
You know, Francis, I wish I could say this is the solution. But there's no one silver bullet, unfortunately. A multi-pronged, multidisciplined, multi-agency approach is needed from government side, transnational collaboration and cooperation. And I think a very proactive approach is the translocating of rhinos to other areas, safer areas. We've translocated rhinos to Botswana, Rwanda, Chad recently. Obviously, you know, those areas, we need to assess the areas, see if the rhinos will be able to adapt there. So we look at habitat, climate, that type of thing. But it's that typical saying of don't keep your eggs in one basket. So I think it's a positive step in the right direction. But we have to look at all the options. There's not one.
And the demand is the big problem. So if it's seen as an aphrodisiac in parts of the world, that's a problem. And you said you've gone to those end users. Some people say, well, look, we can just educate them. Do you believe it's that simple?
It's not that simple. I've seen it firsthand. We filmed undercover for a couple of months in Southeast Asia. And the demand is massive. I was actually quite shocked and surprised. The Chinese, they use it for a status symbol, so it's libation cups, that type of thing, and they pour rice wine into it and they drink it and they think it detoxifies their body. That's the belief. Vietnamese, they use it more for medicinal purposes, but the demand is massive. I'm not taking away from the demand reduction campaigns, but do we have time left? Do we have enough time left?
Yeah. And finally, the motives of the poachers. If you go to court, do you sit there thinking this is going to be hard to deal with, given the networks that they've formed?
You know, we are dealing with highly organized criminal networks. The illegal wildlife trafficking has transformed into one of the world's largest transnational organized criminal activities, alongside the illegal trafficking in drugs, arms, human beings. So we have to address it in that way. It's a crime, and they use the same routes and the same techniques.
All right, thank you so much for your time, Bonne de Bod. And of course, that movie Strip will be coming out with all this footage collected, including what's happening in the courts, what's happening in Vietnam, and what's happening in China. Thank you very much.